Alright, everybody, find the Bible, find the seat. Anytime you get started. There's lots more seats on the pile.
No, I want to
Not
go.
now, no.
No,
Try not to be bored. Also, you have the best questions in the world. I miss it, but you already got to ask them.
No, this is basic.
I broke it.
Yeah, What's up?
I see we get some new chairs.
Yeah, we're supposed to get more, but I missed the freight truck driver's call on Friday. And then I tried calling back on Saturday, so it was off. So, like, they're just sitting in a truck somewhere.
That's terrible.
Yeah, so we got a bunch more coming. We'll have more comfy chairs.
That's actually sad.
Put the stools away. There's plenty of white chairs left. Also, if you haven't signed up for camp or told your
Hey,
parents
guys.
about camp,
Join the group. Come on over.
yeah, slide your chairs over, guys. Join the group.
I just got a death glare.
Why were you surprised by that?
Gotta make one line, a connected line.
It's not that hard. It's like drawing. Just don't pick up your hand. Don't make a row two.
All right, I'm gonna open us in prayer. Lord, thank you so much for this beautiful morning. Thank you for Easter. Thank you for your resurrection. Thank you that we can come here and worship your name. Help us just give you all of our focus right now and that we just worship your name. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Lost or saved and find their way at the sound of your great name. All condemned, feel no shame at the sound of your great name. Every fear has no place at the sound of your great name. The enemy, he has to leave at the sound of your great name. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high and lifted up. And all the world will praise your great name. And all the weak find their strength at the sound of your great name. Hungry souls receive grace at the sound of your great name. The fatherless, they find their rest at the sound of your great name. The sick are healed and the dead are raised at the sound of your great name. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high and lifted up. And all the world will praise your great name. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty. Defender, my Savior, you are my King. Redeemer, my healer, Lord Almighty. Defender, my Savior, you are my King. Jesus, worthy is the Lamb that was slain for us. Son of God and man, you are high and lifted up. So all the world will praise your great name. Your great name. For I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. And I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. No shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. No, you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, love to me, oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, and I don't deserve it. Still, you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Would you guys stand with me for the last song, please? Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you, we live for you. Sing Jesus. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Sing worthy. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh God, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. And I will build my life, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken, and I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation, and I will put my trust in you alone, and I will not be shaken. Holy, there's no one like you. There's none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. There's nothing I desire that can't be found in you. You're everything that I've ever needed. Just give me Jesus. Just give me Jesus. You just give me Jesus. Just give me Jesus. There's nothing I desire that can't be found in you. You're everything I've ever needed. Just give me Jesus. Oh, just give me Jesus. There's nothing I desire that can't be found in you. You're everything I've ever needed. Just give me Jesus. Just give me Jesus. Just give me Jesus. Just give me Jesus. God, you are so amazing, Lord. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for his sacrifice, the eternal life you offer, Lord. Pray as always you continue to speak through Daniel and speak to our hearts, God. Thank you for being so faithful. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Lexi. Oh my. All right, everybody, if you don't have the Bible, time to get up and get one. Make sure you have one in your hands for what's coming. Also, if you guys have not signed up for camp or checked out the details on camp, you got to do it today. If you sign up today, you will save $20 off the cost of camp. So, do it today. Flyers are over there on the kitchen counter. We would love to see you guys at camp. Camp is going to be awesome.
I'm going to be there.
You're welcome. You haven't signed up yet.
No, but I'm still going to be there. I haven't signed up.
Oh, you're not going to sign up. You're just going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We'll kick him out. Don't worry. All right. That is it before we get started. So, with that, turn in your Bibles to the book of Mark, chapter 15.
Oh, what chapter?
Chapter 15 of Mark, page 846. All right. So today is Easter. I don't think anyone missed it, but just in case you did, Happy Easter.
Wait, what?
It is.
Shun the non-believer.
What?
That was out of place. Okay.
I never
So,
said.
the question on the screen is, what does resurrection mean? Okay, that's pretty good. Coming back to life from the dead. That's pretty straightforward. But I think it means something different to different people. In the sense that if you died and you came back to life, what would that mean for you?
Resurrect.
Would that just mean you were back to life? Or would it be a little more meaningful?
It's like a charity.
It'd be a little more meaningful, wouldn't it? So not just the definition of the word, but like literally, what does it mean to you? It'd mean a lot. Right? Likewise, you could probably say the same thing about another person that you love dearly. And it wouldn't be exactly the same as if you died and came back to life, but it would still be very meaningful, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be the same meaning, though. And so that's kind of where this question is meant to go, is what does resurrection mean to you? And a big part of it is the how you're resurrected, the why you're resurrected. Because if how you're resurrected is you were dead for 4 seconds and then they shocked you with some fun little paddles and your heart went, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Right, okay, I'm back at it. That doesn't necessarily say the same exact thing as you were dead for 30 minutes straight. Everyone had given up on you. The doctors were turning out the lights. And suddenly, you start breathing again. That'd be a little bit different, wouldn't it? And this is the other place where this is going to go, is how you die has a lot to do with how impressive it is that you're resurrected. Because the Bible talks about resurrection a few times. We can look at this a few ways. There were times where someone died and they were brought back to life minutes later. Jesus did this for a man's daughter. She was sick, she was dying, and while Jesus was walking to her house, she died. He gets there and says, don't worry about it. To me, it's like she's just sleeping. It'll be as easy to bring her back to life as it would be to wake her up from a nap. And she was only dead for a little bit, so he wakes her back up. And she's fine. A different time, it's Lazarus. He's dead. He's not dead for 30 minutes. He's dead for 4 days. They've put him in a tomb. And Jesus says, open that tomb up. And you're like, no. We shut the door because it smells bad. You don't want to open that door. It's only got worse since we shut the door. You don't want to go in there, okay? And Jesus says, open it up. So they finally open it up, and he calls to Lazarus, and Lazarus gets up and walks out. And that is not a normal miracle of they were dead for a few minutes and I started their heart back up. This is like he was rotting for a few days and I started everything back up. That's impressive. Your soft, squishy bits in here don't like that. They don't like to unsquishify. They only get squishier. That is their whole job in life and death. And he reversed all that. And then you get to Jesus' death and his resurrection. It means something completely and utterly different. We're actually going to watch a video to illustrate that point. Not like the thinking.
Pretty good. Yeah.
We all long for the world to be good, for people to live in peace, act with love and justice. But there's a problem. Something compels us humans to constantly wreak havoc and destruction instead. And we call this evil. And from the Bible's point of view, evil ruins things in at least 2 ways. There's a direct effect of our evil, like when someone steals from another person, they've created injustice. Therefore, they owe something to make it right. But there's another indirect effect of evil, because they've also ruined the environment of the relationship, creating a lack of trust, there's emotional damage. It's like vandalism, and they need to make that right, too. Now, many people believe, hey, God is good, he should be the one to just get rid of all the evil in the world. But let's be honest, the evil that I see everywhere out there, it's the same evil that's inside of me. We have all contributed, and we keep doing it. And so this kind of puts us in a bind. If God's going to rid the world of evil, he'll have to get rid of us. And this is what's so remarkable about the story of the Bible. This God is so good that not only is he going to rid the world of evil, he's going to do it without destroying humanity. So how is he going to do that? Well, early in the story of the Bible, we're introduced to this practice of animal sacrifice, which I know, it seems weird to us, but for the Israelites, it was a very powerful symbol of God's justice and of his grace. So remember, I'm a contributor to the evil that's in the world. I should be removed. But God is allowing this animal's life to be a substitute. It's symbolically dying in my place. And the biblical word for this is atonement, which means to cover over someone's death. But there's a second part to this ritual. Remember, evil also causes this relational vandalism. And in the Bible, this idea is described as polluting or defiling the land and making it unclean. So the priest would symbolically wash away the vandalism by sprinkling the animal's blood in different parts of the temple.
So the animal's blood is cleaning things?
Well, remember, this is a symbol, and it's a symbol that we're not used to. The blood represents life, and the sprinkling of the blood is this representation of how God is cleaning away these indirect consequences of evil in their community. In the Bible, this process is called purification. And so the temple and the land now become a clean space where God and his people can live together in peace.
So this ritual makes things right between Israel and God.
And more than that, the Israelites experience God's love and his grace through these symbols. And by being forgiven, ideally, this would compel them to become people of love and grace too.
Right, that's the ideal, but it wasn't always happening.
Right. So the prophet Isaiah, for example, he talks a lot about this. He opens his book by saying that the continual sacrifices of the Israelites had become meaningless because they were also allowing great evil in their midst, ignoring the poor and the oppressed. Even the Israelite kings were distorting justice. But Isaiah looked forward to a day when a new king from the line of David would come and deal with evil, but in a surprising way. The king would become a servant, and not just serve, but also suffer and die for the evil committed by his own people. And his life would be offered as a sacrifice.
And this is the promise Jesus believed he was fulfilling. He's the King of Israel, suffering and dying on the cross.
In fact, Jesus himself used Isaiah's words when he said that he came to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And that word ransom refers to his sacrifice of atonement. And so all over the New Testament, we hear about how Jesus' death was an atoning sacrifice for us. It covered the debt that humans owe God for contributing to all of the evil and death in his world. But the New Testament authors also talk about Jesus' death as providing purification. And so we hear about Jesus' blood as a symbol of his life, having this ability to wash away the vandalism that evil has caused in us and around us, so we can now live at peace with God.
So that's the meaning behind Jesus' death. But there's more to the story.
Yeah, the New Testament makes this powerful claim that Jesus' death was not final. He rose from the dead. And so he's the sacrifice who broke the power of death and evil, which means that he lives on to offer his life to anyone who will accept it. He is the perfect sacrifice to which all the previous sacrifices were pointing all along.
So because of Jesus, the early Christians stopped participating in the ritual of animal sacrifice.
But they were given new rituals. There are two that Jesus taught his followers to perform. The first is called baptism. Just as Jesus died, so going into the water becomes this personal connection you now have to his death. And in coming out of the water, you, so to speak, come back to life with Jesus. So baptism is this sacred ritual that joins your story to Jesus' death and his resurrection. The second ritual is called the Lord's Supper, which is a reenactment of Jesus' last meal with his disciples, and he used bread and wine to portray his coming death as a sacrifice. And so now, followers of Jesus, they take the bread and the cup regularly to remember and to participate in the power of Jesus' death and in his life.
So these rituals, they remind us of God's love and encourage us to live a life of love and grace.
But they do more than that. They connect us to a new life source. The very power that brought Jesus back from the dead is the same power that can deal with the evil in our own lives and transform us into people who lead lives of love and peace.
Alrighty. All right, so here's the story. Jesus is wrongfully accused. He's badly beaten. Without being convicted of any crime, he's crucified, and then he dies. He's buried in a tomb for 3 days. Early on Sunday morning, he rises back to life, and his followers slowly all find out. And after 40 days on the earth in his new body, he flies into the clouds and returns to heaven. And one day soon, he'll return to establish his kingdom. That's the quick version. But you could probably guess that we had you take out your Bibles for a reason. We're going to do the full version now. We're going to look at all the details, go through the whole story, one piece at a time. So if you haven't been here on a Sunday morning, you may not know. We all take turns reading. That's how it goes. So we're just going to start over here on my left. We'll just do a verse at a time. Boom, 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 all the way around the circle. We'll pause every now and then to talk, answer questions, explain, all that good stuff. But the first part we're going to do is all the way from verse 1 through verse 15. So the first 15 of you guys are going to help us read this out. So you've got Mark chapter 15, verse 1.
Very early in the morning, the leading priests, the elders, and the teachers of religious law, the entire high council, met to discuss their next step. They bound Jesus, led him away, and took him to
Pilate.
Pilate, and the Roman governor Pilate
Oh,
asked Jesus.
so you stop when the little two's there, and then that makes a mystery.
Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "You have said it."
Then the leading priests kept accusing him of many things. Pilate asked him, "Aren't you going to answer them? What about all these charges they're bringing against you?"
But Jesus said nothing, much to Pilate's surprise.
Now is the governor's custom each year during Passover celebration to release one prisoner, anyone the people requested.
One of the prisoners at that time was Barabbas.
Barabbas.
A revolutionary who had committed murder in an uprising.
The crowd went to Pilate and asked him to release the prisoner.
Verse 9.
Yes. Would you like me to release to you this king of the Jews? Pilate asked.
For he realized by now that the leading priest had arrested Jesus very out of envy.
At this point, the leading priests stirred up the crowd to demand the release of Barabbas instead of Jesus.
Pilate asked them, "Then what should I do with this man you call the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "Crucify him."
Fine, Pilate demanded. What crime has he committed? But the mob roared even louder. Crucify him.
So to pacify the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified.
Lead tipped. Lead tipped. That actually is a cat o' nine tails. I don't know if you guys have ever seen pictures of historical cat o' nine tails, but the idea is you would have a whip like a bull whip we're used to for working with cattle. And the idea was not to hit them with it, it was to scare them. You make the crack sound, they run away from it. This was not that whip. This was a bunch of small strands of leather on one big handle. And it was a long enough handle you could really swing it with some force. And the strands would get braided, and you would stick sharp things into the braids, like lead or bone or metal, whatever you had that would be sharp enough to rip open someone's back. So when you get whipped with it, it's not like crack. It's as it goes across your back. That's what they did to Jesus. And this was just step one. So we see here in this section, as they continue to accuse him, as they continue to lay charges against him, he doesn't answer. He doesn't defend himself. He doesn't have a lawyer up there on the stand, trying to explain how none of these claims have any validity. He just takes it silently. And this is something that was actually prophesied hundreds of years earlier. It said that when the Messiah was going to be accused, he would take it like a sheep before his shearers is silent. Interesting. Jesus took all this punishment, all these accusations, and he took it silently. It wasn't unless someone asked him a direct question about whether or not he was who he was that he answered in all of this. This is actually one of several court trials he has. If you want to read some other ones, you can go back and read last week's chapter 14. In that one, the question he finally answered, because he took a bunch of abuse there silently too, he answered, "Are you the Son of God or not?" And he said, "I am." And that was it. And during the whole court trial last time, that's all he said was just, "I am." That's all he would say. This time, all he said was, "You said it." You guys ever heard that expression nowadays? You said it. That nowadays is an expression that has its own meaning stuck onto it. But Jesus was saying it in a very literal sense. He's basically saying, I won't say it. But you said it. So once again, he's going along with, I'm not standing up for myself, even as he confirms something for Pilate. And this charge, King of the Jews, does anyone know why that was even considered a charge? Like, how could that get you thrown in the courthouse for being the king, right? Yeah.
Because he was overruled by Rome.
That was it. You see, Rome, as an empire, had conquered Israel a while back, and they were no longer allowed to have kings of their own nationality. Any king over Israel was going to be a Roman official put in place by Rome. And if you were going around calling yourself King of the Jews, hi, I'm an Israelite, I'm the King of the Jews, the idea was you were a leader in the rebel uprising. That's what you were declaring yourself to be. And so the priests, who were supposed to be on the people's side, were not. They were totally on Rome's side at this point. They went to the Roman officials and said, he's one of them. He's one of those rebels. He's the leader. He's the king of the Jews. You should kill him. God's priests were throwing God's king under the bus. That's pretty rough. Now, interestingly, despite the rebel uprising part, despite the Rome and the Israel fighting each other part, him being the king of the Jews, that was actually true. He was God's chosen king, and he one day will sit on an earthly throne, but for now, he sits on a heavenly throne. All right, we're going to move into the next section. This section, we get to see what happens after the people shout, crucify him, crucify him. We get more details elsewhere. Essentially, this part takes place because Pilate thinks if I do this, maybe that will be enough and I won't have to crucify him. Let's see if that works. Verse 16.
Soldiers took Jesus into the courtyard of the governor's headquarters, called the
Praetorium.
Praetorium, and called out the entire
Regiment. Few confusing words there. So Praetorium, it's part of Roman building construction. They usually built their buildings in a big rectangle, but there was nothing in the middle. It was outdoors in the middle. So you had a yard, like we have a front yard and a backyard. They had a middle yard, where literally your house went around it in a big rectangle shape. And so you would have a place where you could go outside and do outside stuff, but no one could see you. So if you wanted to go garden in your pajamas, that's fine. Also, if you wanted to have a place where no one could get into, so you wanted to have some fancy sculptures that no one could go steal, you stick it in your praetorium. In this case, it's a big place because this is Pilate, the governor's place. And so he has enough area there for the guards to hang out, do their stuff, move prisoners around, and the prisoners can't escape. Because even though you're outside, you're still inside the 8 walls of Pilate's place. So that's a praetorium. That's a Roman word. Next verse.
and they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns and put on his head.
They then saluted him and taunted, "Hail the King of the Jews!"
Verse 19 is me. And they struck him on the head with a reed stick, spit on him, and dropped to their knees in mock worship. Yes? Oh, good question. It'll be your turn to read when we come back. We can take your slot though. Out in the hall, walk down about halfway back to the staircase, and you'll see some water fountains on the wall. Right next to the water fountain.
Yes, the first chapter is the second.
Okay. Can you do verse 20 for us?
When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on again. Then they led him away to be crucified.
So the crown of thorns is in mockery of the fact that he was being accused of being a king. And the Roman guards don't get much of this, but what they do think is they think that he really is a leader in the rebel uprising. They think he really does think himself a king, and they think that's funny. And so they decide, rather than just punishing him the normal way, they're going to go further. Not only did they already beat him with a cat of nine tails within an inch of his life, then they go about mocking him with this painful crown, meant to mock the crown he actually deserves to wear. But they don't think he does. So they finally get him back into his normal clothes, and then they lead him away to be crucified. At this point, he'd be carrying his own cross. We're going to see, though, That doesn't last long. Verse 21. He's too weak at this point.
Could a passer be named Simon?
It's a passerby. Someone who's just passing by.
Passerby named Simon, who was from
Cyrene? It's a place in Africa.
was coming from the countryside. This man and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus. And they brought Jesus to a place called
Golgotha.
which means place of the skull.
They offered him wine drugged with
Myrrh.
myrrh, but he refused it.
Okay, quick explanation there. Golgotha, if you don't know, is the same root word we get the word Calvary from. That's actually why our church is named Calvary Chapel. That hill called Golgotha is the place where Jesus died on the cross. And depending on which language you're reading it in, it's Calvary. And so our church name actually translates to Skull Chapel, chapel meaning church. So Skull Church, Chico. Welcome to Skull Church. But no, we're not named after skulls in general. We're named after that one place, that specific hill. It's a very important hill. That hill is attached to Jerusalem. That hill is the place where Abraham took Isaac, his son, to kill him because God said, I need you to kill your one and only son. And Abraham was willing to do it. And then God said, I never needed you to kill your son. I needed to see if you were willing to do whatever I asked you to do, no matter what it cost you. And you were. But it was interesting God chose killing his only son because it was symbolic of what would happen hundreds of years later when God allowed his own son to be killed on that same spot. It's a very important hill, and that's why our church is named after it. Yeah.
Why does it say drugged with myrrh?
Drugged with myrrh. That's drugged with myrrh. So the idea was this. We go back thousands of years to read the story. Okay, this is 2,000 years ago. They didn't have the kind of medicine we have now. They were offering a man about to die a brutal, painful death drugs that would take some of the pain off. It would just take the edge off. It wouldn't be much. Be a little alcohol in the wine, and the myrrh would act as a painkiller. So it's like offering someone about to sit in the electric chair some aspirin. It's I mean, maybe it'll do something, but you're dying. It doesn't matter if it does something. And Jesus just says, no. This is what I signed up for. I chose this. I'm not going to take painkillers. I'm going to walk right through it. So he says no. Who is verse 24? Alex? Yes?
Then the soldiers nailed him to the cross. They divided his clothes into dice to decide who would get each piece.
It was 9 o'clock in the morning when they crucified him.
A sign announced the charge against him. Herod, the king of the Jews.
Verse
27?
2 revolutionaries were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left.
The people passing by shouted abuse, shaking their heads in mockery. Ha, look at that. Look at you now, they yelled at him. You said you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days.
Well, then save yourself and came down from the cross and come down from the cross. The leading priests and teachers of religious law also mocked Jesus. He saved others, they scoffed, but he can't save himself.
Let this
Messiah?
Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so we can see it and believe him. Even the men who were crucified with Jesus
Ridiculed him.
ridiculed him.
It's more mockery and, just kind of calling names, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to pick apart here. I'll try and go quickly because we still have a bit more to read. But as he's put up on the cross and he's nailed there, they throw dice for his clothing. And that is something that's actually prophesied earlier in the Bible. It was prophesied hundreds of years before this took place. It actually went through so many of the details of his death. You couldn't get this stuff wrong. If you read that, you would see it happening and go, oh, holy cow, this is this is going down. This is the Messiah. He is dying exactly like the Old Testament said he was going to die. And that's a crazy thing because you can control a lot of stuff. If you read the Old Testament, you're like, oh, see here it says the Messiah is supposed to heal the sick and feed the hungry and do all this stuff and teach poor people. And okay, so now if I just go do that stuff or fake that stuff, then I could be looked at as the Messiah. People would believe I was the Messiah. But there's some stuff you can't control as you try and play the part. And Jesus was not playing the part, but some people thought he was. They thought he was playing the part. But you can't control where you're born. You can't get yourself born in the right city. You can't make your mom have been a virgin when she gave birth to you. You can't go do these miracles under tight scrutiny again and again and again. And you certainly can't control the circumstances of a death at the Romans' hands where everyone follows every little detail that was written in the scripture. You can't control that. So Jesus dying on the cross, he suffers all this indignant ridicule. People are just mocking him again and again and again. And he will say some stuff from the cross. If you go through all 4 Gospels, you'll find he says several things. But he never answers the ridicule. He never says anything back to the mockers. What he has to say has nothing to do with what they're saying. He's on his own mission. He has his own goals, and that's the only time he opens his mouth. So as they continue to mock him, we see even the 2 criminals who are dying on a cross next to him, they even start mocking him. How bad would that be? Can you imagine? We don't even have that, but imagine a room where there's like 3 electric chairs in a row, and just to like get through the long list of death row, they execute 3 guys at a time. And you're in the middle, and as you're sitting down to be put to death, the other guys sitting down to be put to death also decide, let's pick on him. Let's make fun of how he's dying. Like, aren't you literally about to die the same way? Does that make sense? That's not logical. That doesn't fit. And yet, those guys on those 2 crosses next to him, they would have heard about Jesus. At this point, he's famous. See, a week or so before this, on what we now call Palm Sunday, Jesus enters into Jerusalem, and he did not ask for a parade. A parade constructed itself because of his famousness. He is so famous at this point in his life that he just tried to walk into the Capitol. That's it. Just go. Just get into the Capitol, and a parade forms around him. That's how famous he is. That is a ridiculous level of fame. Just about any famous person you can think of, short of maybe the president, could come to Chico today, and you probably wouldn't even know it until they left. You probably have no clue. You have to be a ridiculous level of famousness to get that kind of treatment. And now he's dying on a cross. These guys know what he used to say about himself. These guys know what he used to do, the miracles he used to work, the stuff he used to teach. So watching him die like a normal person is really not funny. But it is kind of ironic. Like, this is the guy who could raise people from the dead. This is the guy who could make food out of food. And think about that for a second. We're talking thousands of people worth of food out of one person's worth of food. That is a crazy miracle. That is creation of matter. And now he's just dying like a normal person. That's weird. And they mock him for it. Yeah.
I feel like everyone involved in dying at that point would have had a better time if they just discussed the weather. Not like it matters, but might be interesting.
Just try and distract themselves.
Yeah, it's like, I'll bet you $5 if it's sunny. And I'll bet you $20 if I'm still alive to find out.
No, do you know this chapter well?
No.
You picked sunny. You're going to laugh in a minute.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
that was good. That was a good guess. That was pretty good.
You could have picked any other weather. It wouldn't have even made sense. But you picked sunny. I love it.
We'll get the extra $20 for being alive.
Yeah, there you go. Well, interestingly, Jesus being beat within an inch of his life before he was crucified comes into play here, as the 2 guys on left and right were likely not. See, typically you don't get beaten that badly and then crucified. Usually when they crucify you, there's a very specific goal in mind, and it comes into play with a sign they stuck up over his head. There's a sign over his head that says King of the Jews, but it would say it, if it's following tradition, in 3 languages. Latin, the official language of the Roman government; Greek, the common language of all of their many, many countries they had under their thumb; and then the local language, depending on where the crucifixion took place. So for here, probably Hebrew. So they've got King of the Jews written 3 times on his sign in 3 languages. They've also got Jesus of Nazareth, his name. Now this was done because they put these guys up for crucifixion on a hill next to the main road as you're coming into the Capitol, so that they become the billboards for don't do that stuff.
I see.
See, typically it didn't say King of the Jews.
Okay.
Typically it said insurrectionist, murderer, thief. It said your crime in 3 languages. It had your name too. King of the Jews was listed as his crime. Now Pilate did this specifically. The beating was special in the sense that he did this hoping like he takes out the beaten up bloody Jesus and the crowd's like, yeah, good job, Pilate. And he doesn't actually have to kill him. He's hoping he can make the crowd happy enough by just getting Jesus messed up. That didn't work out. And then second to that, as his last little, I do have some power as governor, because he didn't want to make the priests angry, but he really didn't like the priests. He put King of the Jews on the sign to mess with them. Because they didn't want anyone to know Jesus really was the king. They just wanted the Romans to be mad about Jesus calling himself the king. They didn't actually want Jesus to get any press about that. No advertising. And Pilate's like, so that's exactly what I'll do. You guys don't want it. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give Jesus all the press there is about him being the king of the Jews. So that's what he sticks on the sign. To us, that doesn't sound like a crime. To the Roman government, it was. To the priests, it was offensive because they didn't think Jesus was in charge of them. So this is what's on his sign, King of the Jews. So you're walking into town and you see up there on the signs, oh, yep, there's a rebel. He's dying because he's a rebel. There's a King of the Jews. There's a rebel. Please.
It seems like a day on the list.
All right, so he's up there dying. Everyone is making fun of him at this point. Everyone. Now we're going to move on to verse 33. Now, at this point, it's been since 9 o'clock he was crucified, so we're at noon. You can see in that first verse there. So that's been how many hours? 3 hours. 3 hours. Just sitting up there, slowly suffocating and bleeding to death. Who's got verse 33? I don't remember when we paused. You do. Go for it.
At noon, darkness fell across the whole land and blood blew across.
Then after it fall, Jesus called out with a loud voice,
Give it your best shot. It's hard.
Elon, Elon, lama
Sabachthani.
which means, my God, why have you abandoned me?
Yeah, I love that in Hebrew you can put a k and a f next to each other with no vowels. That's just wild. Girls in the back, you guys, I don't think you've got 3. Go for it.
Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah.
That's because that Eloi word you said, it kind of sounds like Eli. Does that make sense? They didn't know what he was saying. Go for it.
Whenever men does his dialogue, whether at to the of a minister, so he could say, wait a minute, let's see whether Elijah comes to do it. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and breathed his last. When the Roman officer
Wait, 38.
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. It's right about 39.
When the curtain of the sanctuary of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom.
When the Roman officer who stood facing him saw how he had died, he exclaimed, "This man truly was the Son of God." Verse 40?
Some women were there watching from a distance, including Mary
Magdalene. Good try. It's good.
Mary, the mother of James, and the other and of Joseph, and
Simone.
Salome.
I always say Simone. I thought that was funny. Verse 41.
It had been flowers of Jesus.
Try that again.
Oh, followers.
There we go.
And followers of Jesus and cared for him while he was in
Galilee.
Galilee. Many other women who had come with him to Jerusalem were also there.
Nice. Sorry, guys, you get some tricky words.
Simon.
All right, so Galilee, if you guys don't know, that's the northern part of the country. It's kind of like Hicksville. It's a bunch of small towns around a lake. So, yeah.
What I wouldn't give to see a salami flower.
I'm going to try this when I get home. Okay.
Well, just like salami
Just
on
arrange it decoratively in a flower shape. I think that's beautiful. Salami roses or something?
Yeah.
And put bacon in the middle.
Yeah.
You could probably find that on Pinterest.
Bacon stamen. I like that. Okay.
Put bacon people.
Let's go back through this real quick. All right, so 3 o'clock, crazy miracle occurs. Jesus is dying on the cross. Oh, sorry, noon, the miracle occurs up until 3 o'clock. Now, this is interesting. Does anyone know how long Jesus was on the cross for? Yes.
With my math, 6 hours, roughly a fourth of a day.
Yeah, 6 hours, quarter of a day.
That's a lot
So
of
if
death.
the sun is dark from noon to 3, when did the sun come back?
Sometime between.
The what?
Right?
If the sun is dark from noon to 3, when did the sun come back? Yeah. Don't you think that would strike people as kind of weird? The right when Jesus dies is right when the sunlight comes back.
Yeah, I don't
That's
know.
what convinced this Roman officer. He sees everyone mocking him, and Jesus doesn't say anything back. I mean, he's got nowhere to go. He's got nothing better to do. He could have sat there and rebuked them and told them, you know, what meanie heads they were for like making fun of a guy who's dying.
He could have started betting with the other people there.
He could have taken part in all that weather betting. He could have done a lot of things, but he doesn't. He says just a few small things here and there. One of them isn't mentioned in Mark. One of those two guys who's mocking him is convinced before the soldier. So the soldier gets convinced right when the sunlight comes back, when Jesus dies. There's two guys up there, right? They're both mocking him at the beginning, but during that 6 hours, at some point, one of the guys realizes that there's something odd about a man who's being mocked by everyone, but he never says a thing. There's something odd about a man who said so much about God, and now he has nothing to say. And this man, on one side of him, comes to faith in Jesus Christ while he's dying. And that's one of the few times Jesus opens his mouth. Jesus turns to that man and says, "You'll be with me in paradise. I'll see you in heaven." That's one of the few times Jesus opens his mouth while he's dying. To tell a guy, "You're saved. I can see your faith. You're saved." You know how the guy showed his faith? Because that's something you'll see in Scripture. Faith isn't really real until it shows itself. He didn't just have faith in his heart. Jesus was like, "Oh, I see that." That's not how it worked. See, the guy came to faith, and then he hears the other guy, past Jesus, mocking Jesus. And he says to the other guy, "Hey, you know what? Just quit it. We deserve to die. You and me were both guilty. We're up here because we got caught. This guy's up here, and he's not even guilty." And so he sticks up for Jesus. That was the show of his faith. It showed all of a sudden. That's why Jesus turns to him and says, "That's legit. You're going to be in heaven." Pretty cool. So the sun goes dark. I'm sure that freaked out a lot of people. 3-hour eclipses don't just happen. Then he cries out this weird phrase. Good, was it you? Yeah, good drawing on that. That was fantastic. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. This is not the way you pronounce it because I'm terrible at Hebrew. I just say that because it rhymes. It makes it easier to pronounce. It's actually a line from Psalm 22. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It lays out almost every detail of Jesus' death, but it was written hundreds of years ago by King David. Hundreds of years ago, before Jesus ever died on the cross. Interestingly, I love this factoid, it was written by King David before crucifixion was invented. I love that one. So he writes down the whole thing about pierced by the nails, and they hadn't even invented, they haven't even thought of crucifixion yet.
It's going to be nailed to a piece of wood.
People are reading it like, pierced by nails.
But there's an issue.
I wonder
Dude,
what that means.
Highlights.
Is that prophecy or just like cruciception or something? I don't know. So David lays out all this stuff. He even lays out the gambled for his clothing bit. Like the fact that Jesus is going to be put to death and they're going to gamble for his robe. That's pretty crazy. Crazy details are included. But There weren't always numbers on the Psalms. That's like a more modern invention. Numbers in your Bible didn't get put there by the author who wrote those books. Okay, it's like we added the numbers later so I could say stuff like, turn to Mark chapter 15. Once upon a time, they didn't put the numbers in yet. That wasn't a thing. You'd be like, turn to Mark where it says very early in the morning. And you would go through Mark. You just, okay, it's in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. It's in here somewhere. And eventually, you just get good at it. You start memorizing the order they came in. And you know, like, that's most of the way through. It's right towards the end.
Eventually,
Then you wouldn't have to flip through the whole book of Mark. You just like go to the end of Mark and go backwards. Eventually, you see very early in the morning. You're like, oh, there it is. So what Jesus does here when he says Eli Eli lama sabachthani, he is naming the psalm he wants people to go check out. He's dying on the cross, and he's like, check. Well, he can't do that, but check out my prophecy. Check out the prophecy of this moment. Go read it. Realize I am the God. See, the problem is when they read the Old Testament, they tended to cram all of Jesus' prophecies into one thing. There's a lot of prophecies about Jesus. There are prophecies about his first coming, there's prophecies about his second coming, and they had taken both and decided it's all happening at once, because that sounds better. And there's a problem with that. Jesus' first and second coming are so far apart, we still haven't seen his second coming. And when they cram all of his prophecies together into one event, there's an issue with that, because a lot of the stuff that happens at the second coming, he didn't do. And just that simple fact that he didn't do that stuff made them think, he's a fake. And so he points them back to the ending of the first coming, prophesied in Psalms, and he says, go read it. I am, as I die, fulfilling every last word. Go read it. That's why he shouts out something so strange from the cross. He's quoting Psalms. Then the officer comes to faith. They mock him some more. And it turns out the women were there. And this is pretty cool because I don't know if you guys realize this. Out of the 11 apostles that were still following Jesus, because Judas fell away, only one of them showed up to Jesus' crucifixion. John. He's the only one. The rest of them were all somewhere else. They were hiding. They thought if they were going to kill Jesus, that they might actually come after the other apostles too. And so they just hid. They just stayed behind closed doors all day. They didn't go outside. They were too afraid. But the women weren't. I love it. They're followers of Jesus too. They followed him down. They put him up at their house. They feed him. They did all kinds of stuff for these guys. And the women are just like, heck with that. We're going. We're not going to hide. We're going to go. And so they're there watching Jesus die. Then we get to Jesus' burial. Verse 42. Help me out. Who reads? You? Go for it.
This all happened on Friday, the day of preparation, the day before the Sabbath. As evening approached, Joseph from
Arimathea.
asked Jesus' sister. Joseph was he was waiting for the kingdom of God to come.
Pilate couldn't believe that Jesus was already dead, so he called for the Roman officer and asked if he had died yet. Officer confirmed that Jesus was dead, so Pilate told Joseph he could have the body.
Joseph bought a long sheet of linen cloth. Then he took Jesus' body down from the cross, wrapped it in cloth, and laid it in a tomb that had been carved out of the rock. Then he rolled the stone from the entrance.
Okay.
And Mary, mother of Joseph, saw when Jesus' body was
Okay. I'll pause there. So Joseph of Arimathea is an interesting guy. And this is leading to something else we actually see more in John's gospel, less in Mark's. And that's that high council that got Jesus arrested, that got Jesus beat up, that got Jesus, beat with a whip, that got Jesus crucified. They did all this stuff. There were some guys on that council who actually believed in Jesus. There were some guys on that council that actually thought he's the real deal. And they didn't want to kill him. But they were so scared of the other guys on the council finding out, they just played along. They just did what everybody else did. Said what everybody else said. And somehow Joseph, in Jesus' lifetime, couldn't bring the courage to go and switch sides. But once Jesus died, for some reason, he found his courage. He thought Jesus was the real Messiah, and he went to go ask for the body so he could be buried properly. Jesus, I don't know if you guys are aware, was homeless. Has anyone ever say Jesus was homeless? It's not a popular fact. I don't know why. Jesus embraced it. He was cool with it. His disciples became homeless to go and follow him. Isn't that wild? So why did Joseph have to ask for the body to bury Jesus properly? Because Jesus didn't have anybody else who was going to bury him properly. He was dying out of town, if you will. His family was not to be seen. He's poor. He's homeless. Who else is going to do it? So Joseph of Arimathea says, hey, can I have the body? Pilate doesn't even know if Jesus is dead yet. I don't know if you guys get it, but 6 hours on the cross, that's not a normal time for death. Usually they didn't beat you beforehand. Usually you got up on that cross. Romans invented the footstool thing so you could stick your feet on it and you could live longer, so that the crucifixion would take all day. And sometimes more than a day. Sometimes you'd fall asleep up there and you'd wake up the next day and remember, I'm still crucified. So when Pilate says, do you want the body? I gotta check. I don't even know if he's dead yet. He was really surprised. In fact, everyone was a little surprised he was already dead. The officer didn't even believe it. He had to check. Now, in Mark, it doesn't tell you how he checked. You guys know how he checked that Jesus was dead? He takes a spear and goes, you dead? And stabs him with the spear. I know that's surprising, but it was a worthwhile test. Because after he stabs him, what comes out is the blood separated. He'd been dead long enough by the time he gets stabbed that the blood had already pooled in his abdomen, and what comes out, the plasma and the red blood cells are no longer mixed. It was now separated. And so what comes out looks, they call it water, because they didn't get the plasma thing back then. They hadn't discovered how blood worked. So they saw water and blood pour out of him, but they did know from experience that meant you were dead. Because if you've had internal bleeding to the point where it gets time to separate, that means you don't have enough blood anymore. Your body has jettisoned it into your abdomen. You're dead. You can't survive with that much blood loss. Internal bleeding is one of those things that gets you to the head of the line, the ER. Like, they will bump you up because you will die in minutes after that much internal bleeding. So yeah, I know it's comical the way I said it, but he stabs him to check, and sure enough, yeah, he's already dead. So Joseph gets the body. Yeah.
I feel like if you check someone by stabbing them with a spear, there's only really one answer to that question, no matter what they were before.
Well, I don't think it's a yes automatically. It's more like, I will be soon. Thank you very much.
Well, like, depends on where you stab them. Like, if you stab them in the neck, there's
He said
really
the side, so like somewhere here.
Yeah. It's like, are you dead?
Like, did it go like a really far forward, just like
Yeah, we finished that. All right, so Jesus is leaving the tomb. This is pretty standard. Back then, if you had anyone in your family or friend group that was rich enough to own a carved out tomb or rich enough to buy a carved out tomb for you, they would, because bodies smell bad. They didn't have all the preservatives and the mortician science that we have now. So they would stick you in a cool, dry place, try and keep your body as cold as possible. They'd figured out somehow that made your body last longer. They would also, we'll find out soon, cram as many good-smelling things around and near and on you as possible, so that there'd be a longer period of time where people could come and mourn for you, because you were going to start smelling really bad really fast. So we see day one, he's buried in a tomb. The next day, they're going to try and get some spices to go and put there. Chapter 16. I'm so lost. Who read last? Okay, yep, chapter 16, you got verse 1.
The resurrection. Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out to the burial spot with him on Jesus' body.
Thank you for that. You number 2?
Salami.
Very early on Sunday morning, just as sunrise, they went to the tomb. On the way, they were asking each other, "Who will?"
Wait. On the way is verse 3. Sorry. Everyone was trying to let you know.
Okay,
I
on
didn't
the
understand
way,
what they were saying either.
they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone from the entrance to the tomb?
But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside. When they entered the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side. The women were shocked.
But the angel said, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus, not Jesus of
Nazareth.
Nazareth,
That's like his hometown.
who were crucified. Who was crucified? He wasn't here.
He isn't.
He isn't here. He is risen from the dead. Look, this is where they laid his body."
Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see him there, just as he told you before he died.
Then flags them to trembling, and
Bewildered?
bewildered, and they said nothing to anyone because they were too frightened.
Okay. Sorry about the Galilee thing. Phonetics don't really work on words from other languages. They have different ways to pronounce letters. All right, so Jesus' tomb is found empty. Now, it's pretty common back then to have something to kind of close off the tomb. Overnight, animals would wander in and have a meal of it, and they didn't like that, so they would put something in the way of the door. What these women didn't know about was that there was originally going to be no guard there, and then the priest went to Pilate and said, heck no. He said he was going to come back to life after 3 days, so we got to guard that place so his disciples don't go steal the body. So the women didn't know, but the tomb had been sealed with a Roman seal. It had a guard set out front. It had all this stuff that was going to be in their way. They just thought they might get there early before the tombs got opened up, and they would need someone to open the tomb. That's all they're thinking. They get there, they see no guards. They see no seal. They see the door already open. They're like, wow, the groundskeeper got up like really early this morning. This is crazy. So they just walk right in. Ah! Angels. Angels are always freaking people out. They gotta learn. You don't just pop up like that. It's bad manners. But they're there. They freak him out. They tell him the message. They say, "We know who you're looking for. He's not here." Which is the only reason I corrected who read isn't as wasn't. I didn't mean to sound too corrective, except that that's a really big deal. Not that you messed up, but what you might have said. If you said wasn't here, that would mean something completely different, huh? Than isn't here, right?
That was like just kind of did not die that much, I guess.
Now, this is interesting because this is something that actually gets taught today in religions other than Christianity, and even in some classrooms that look into this portion of history. The idea is that Jesus passed out on the cross and just he was so tuckered out from all those beatings. And when they put him in the tomb, he took like a 3-day nap, and man, he felt so much better.
Especially with that stab wound.
He just
right there.
yeah, no, it totally healed him.
Oh.
Laying alone with a wound untended to for 3 days totally fixes things.
Yeah.
And then he just stretched a little, and he just kind of rolled the stone out of the way. It took multiple people most of the time, and just walked right past the guards who totally didn't notice the sound of stone moving against stone. And he was cool after that.
Did not notice the dead guy.
And then he's like, "Oh, I should tell people I came back to life. That'd be perfect."
Wouldn't that be really fun?
Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's kind of the story that's told in Islam, is that Jesus didn't really die. His resurrection is a falsification to them. And there are other cults, break-offs from Christianity, and they teach the same thing. Jesus didn't really die. Now, that's silly to me for multiple reasons. Not the least of which because we have a record of him dying. and in being checked as if he was dead. And the person who was checking was not some mere mortal, some average Joe. The person who was checking was a professional executioner. His literal job is to kill people and to make sure that they are killed. And when you ask him if someone is dead, he didn't answer. I love that. That's the true sign of a professional. Professionals know how to watch their butts and make sure they don't make mistakes because they're capable of it. So how did he check if Jesus was dead? Kill him again.
Yeah.
You see that why that was funny the first time, but now it fits perfectly. If your one and only job is to kill someone and someone asks you, is he dead? You don't like lift his arm and see how fast it drops. You don't take his pulse. Let's just kill him again.
He is now.
So efficient. So when someone says, nah, he didn't die on the cross, you're like, no, they killed him twice. Right? Yeah, just to make sure.
He was very dead, not your average amount.
Extra dead.
What do you think? His head is lying on the ground.
No, okay, let's not go too far. All right. So, he dies, he comes back to life. Almost no one believes this at first glance. That's what we're going to see here in this next section. People take a while to figure this out because it seems like everyone they tell is like, no, I don't think so, guys. Come on, you had to see something else that just tricked you into believing you saw Jesus alive again. All right, so who's got verse 9? Let's see, who read the next one?
I can read if you don't.
I'm losing track. Did you? Okay, go for it.
After Jesus rose from the dead early on Sunday morning, the first person who saw him was Mary Magdalene, the woman from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went to the disciples who were grieving and told them what had happened. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe.
Afterward, he appeared in a different form to 2 of his followers who were walking from Jerusalem into the country.
They rushed back to tell the others, but no one believed them.
Still later he appeared to the 11 disciples as they were eating together. We were both
Rebuked.
of him unbelief because they refused to believe those who had seen him after he had raised from the dead.
It's like a really bold correction. Okay, pause there for just a second. Just to re-emphasize, no one seems to believe this. Now, those 2 guys on the road, we don't get a lot of details from Mark. That time he appears to the 11 disciples, we don't get a lot of details from Mark. The other Gospels shed more light on that. On the road, he walks and he talks with them all the way from Jerusalem out to the country town where they were going. When he gets there, he shares a meal with them. All of this interaction, and yet when they say we saw Jesus, they're like, no. Like, we had a conversation with him for hours, and then we shared a meal with him, and we didn't imagine that. We didn't both share the exact same dream sequence where we had the same conversation and the same meal. Like, we actually experienced this, guys. No, don't think so. So then he finally appears to the 11, except Mark shortens it up. Really, he has to appear twice, because the first time there's only 10 guys, and like the 11th guy comes back, and all 10 of them are like, dude, you just missed Jesus, he was here. And he's like, no, I won't believe it unless I see him too. So Jesus comes back, and he's like, okay, I'm here. You believe it now? And he's like, yes, I do believe it now. I'm sorry.
He's behind the curtain.
So Jesus appears again and again and again, and then he sticks around for 40 days and keeps doing it. Keeps appearing again and again and again. At one point, he actually appears to a big enough crowd. They said there was at least 500 people there. And eventually, so many of his original followers get to see him alive from the dead that it starts back up the momentum that was lost when he died. So many people lost their faith when he died that he stays around for 40 days to reestablish them, to get them back on track, to bring them back into belief. It's pretty cool. He saw their unbelief. He wasn't upset by it. He just dealt with it. Yeah.
And I feel like it was kind of rude to wait 3 days before being revived, because like it's just kind of something where it's like you haven't think, oh God, he's dead.
No.
3 days later.
It's not rude. Because he told them about it in advance. He told them every time he mentions his death, he mentions his resurrection too. And most of the time, he mentions the 3-day part too. He actually says, like, and 3 days later I will rise. And I kid you not, you know what they did? They all stood around talking about this afterwards, going like, what do you think he meant by 3 days later he'll rise?
Symbolism.
They honestly thought it was just some parable he liked to tell frequently. Like some story that has some significant meaning. I don't know what it is. And they never figured it out until 3 days later he rises from the dead. I do like that though, because it not only says they didn't understand it, it not only says they asked about it, but they never really asked him about it, but it also says the Pharisees heard him say it, and they understood it. The reason they asked for the guards to be put outside his tomb is because they had heard and understood what he meant when he said, I will die, and then I will rise 3 days later. They literally said, you've got to keep the guards there through all 3 days, because if he gets stolen anywhere in those 3 days, the disciples are going to claim he was risen from the dead. You got to put the guards there. So even the Pharisees got it. Okay, then we get to the last part here, verse 15.
And then he told them, go into all the world and preach the good news to everyone.
Oh, anyone who believes and is baptized will be saved, but anyone who refuses to believe will be condemned. Do you for signs that the company of the world is cast out in the
They will be able to handle snakes with safety, and if they drink anything poisonous, it won't hurt them. They will be able to place their hands on the sick, and they will be healed. When the word of youth have finished talking with them, they took it up to heaven and sat down in the place of honor at God's right hand.
And the disciples went everywhere and preached, and the Lord worked through them, confirming what was said by many miraculous signs.
Nice. Now that is a summary. Like I said, Mark is known for being the shortest of the Gospels. And so if you want the full story that he just summed up there, you got to go read Acts. Acts is the long version that details every single thing that happens. It even puts more details into him flying off into the sky. Huh?
Is it actually out?
Oh, well, see, it's not even a joke because that's the real full title. It's the Acts of the Apostles. All right, so that's it for what we're going to read today. But I am curious if you guys would like to see any of this stuff. What I have here prepared is 14 different evidences for what we just read having actually occurred. And these evidences don't necessarily rely on the Bible being true for these to be provable. And the idea is that there's a lot of people out there who know about the Bible, they know about Jesus, they know about the story of his death and his resurrection, but they don't believe it. And they usually come up with different claims or beliefs of their own to explain away why this story is so prevalent, why it's so popular. They'll say stuff like, he didn't really die on the cross. They'll say stuff like, he did die, but he never came back to life. People just lied about that. They'll say stuff like, and this is my favorite, Jesus doesn't even exist. He's not a real person. It's just a book. There was never anyone who was named Jesus. I mean, that guy never existed.
Okay, that's
People say these things. And what we have here is evidence from either logic or archaeology or history outside the Bible that backs up these different points along the story. Now, this isn't all the evidence. This is just the easiest 14 to stick up on a screen real quick. So if you guys want to pick one, I think we at least have time for one, and maybe we'll have time for two. Which one do you want?
Number one.
You want Jesus' existence?
Yes.
Okay.
I want Jesus' death. I want Jesus' death. Jesus exists.
Okay, here we go.
There's a mouse. Wait, how many?
I don't usually use it because it's so slow, but
How can you?
for this one, it's the only way to do, skip to number 14
Are we still gonna
quickly.
do it?
All right, so virtually all historians agree that Jesus was a real person because many ancient writings tell about him. And it wasn't just Christians that wrote about Jesus either. Greek, Roman, and even Jewish authors all describe him as a real person from their day. And most of those accounts even include his miracles. Not in a doubting way, in a this happened sort of way. And yet modern skeptics often feel that their best strategy for denying the evidence of his resurrection is to deny that he even existed. If you can somehow get people to believe Jesus is fake, he's not even a real person, you don't have to prove he didn't die. You don't have to prove he didn't rise from the dead. You don't have to prove his miracles are fake. If you can get people to believe he's fake, that's an easy step. But the problem is, no one can actually prove this. The evidence of his existence is so large that anyone whose job it is to study this stuff already knows Jesus is a real person. None of them doubt that. Yeah.
Did Jesus ever have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, totally. Jesus was the first kid that Mary and Joseph had because she was a virgin when she had Jesus. But then he goes on to have brothers and sisters. They're mentioned a few times. We even get the names of some of the brothers. James was one of them. And Jesus made a special trip to see James after his resurrection because James and the brothers and sisters, they didn't believe him being the Messiah. His own brothers and sisters didn't believe him. They thought he was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. No joke. But after he appears to James, James not only converts and becomes a believer, James eventually becomes a pastor and leads the church in Jerusalem. Which is pretty cool because James wasn't even from Jerusalem. All right. Do you guys want to do one more? That was shorter than I had expected.
Are we still gonna have time at the end?
Time at the end for what?
Games.
That is not part of my scripted hour and a half of service time. No. One more.
One last.
Death. Brother James.
Death.
Do the Brother James.
Death.
Oh, I just kind of said what's on that one.
I know.
I slipped it in. Yeah.
Death.
The tomb was guarded. Very nice. Okay, which number is that? 6.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good list.
Come on, mouse, don't fail me now. I think the batteries are dying. I've asked too much of it.
The mouse has failed you.
How dare you ask
Oh.
for a mouse?
If only there were actual
Mouse is a
I'd like to
cinder
make a
cross.
special shout out to that other guy featured in number 7. No one knows who that other guy is.
All right. Well, usually you push one button, it sends out like a burst of signal for a half second. You do the math, and it's like a bajillion volts. Okay. Critics routinely dismiss Matthew's story about the guards being bribed to say that they fell asleep, giving the disciples opportunity to steal the body. That's Matthew chapter 28. But Matthew would have no reason to make up the story about the guards being bribed except to counter the story of the guards saying that they fell asleep. Either way, the guards were there, the body had been in the tomb, and the tomb had been guarded, and the body was no longer there. This is one of those things that's just logic, and if you don't know logic very well, it may be hard to figure out. But the idea is this. If all of our other sources outside the Bible all say that the tomb was guarded, and the tomb guards reported the body missing, and then some sources say they were paid, and some sources say Jesus rose from the dead, what do they all agree on?
There was guards.
Jesus existed, Jesus died,
And he was
Jesus
not
was
there.
buried, and Jesus was no longer in the tomb 3 days later. So every source, even the ones who don't like Jesus, even the ones like from the Jewish authors who really don't like him at all agree that he existed, he died, he was buried, and the tomb was later found empty. They all agree on those. So even if you don't like it, the evidence points in that direction. Then you have to ask the question, did he rise from the dead, or didn't he? My favorite part is this. The story about the guards that is verifiable is that they said, we fell asleep and the disciples came to steal the body while we slept. Where's the logical hole in that story?
The disciples were having a meal.
No, that's not a logical hole.
Could be sleeping.
Yes.
The disciples.
Oh, you're close. You got it backwards, though. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking that the moving giant rocks around would probably wake them up.
Still not a logical hole, but yes, definitely a hole.
There's a stereotype
Yes.
about
It
guards
makes a
being
noise.
jumpers.
It makes noise along with the rock.
Guys, think about this for a second.
Oh,
I'm asleep. Santa left me presents under the tree.
oh,
I found them in the morning.
oh,
Where's the logical hole?
He had to be there. How do they know it was the disciples?
Thank you. If you're asleep, you don't know who took the body. If you're asleep, all you know is the body was missing when you woke up. If your story includes the identity of someone you can't see because you were sleeping, then you know the story is fake. It's a logical whole. Now, if they said we were sleeping, the disciples probably stole the body, or we think the disciples stole the body, or, I'll bet it was those, like any of those versions of the story would totally fly. But not, we were sleeping and while we slept, the disciples stole the body. That doesn't fly. That's impossible. You can't know who did the thing while you weren't looking. All right, I think that's all we have time for. You guys want another one later? We can click on them when the mouse starts working. Anyways, the point of all this, though, is that Jesus didn't just die. That's the whole point of Easter. It's why this is a huge holiday, and Good Friday is less of a huge holiday. Why? Well, because his death is super important. It's when he paid the price for our sins. But if Jesus died on the cross and then he stayed dead, how would you know for certain whether or not he was legit?
Evidence.
Don't normal people die? Don't fakers die? If Jesus dies on the cross for your sins and no one believes it, it doesn't matter for much. It doesn't count for much. But if Jesus dies on the cross and says, wait for me, I'll be back in 3 days, and then he does it, that shows he is not a normal person. That shows he did not die as a normal person. It is the truest evidence you're ever going to get. Plus, it does something else extra, which is just amazing for us Christians. It tells us that death is no longer scary because Jesus already beat it. It shows us what's on the other side. It shows us what Jesus is capable of. You don't have to look at death and go, oh, what's going to happen? You can look at Jesus and go, oh, that's what's going to happen. Jesus promises you life after death, and then he says, like this. I love that. Because that's not the same kind of faith. Faith in something you don't even know what it is scary. Faith in something Jesus has already shown to you, oh, that's so good. That's called hope. So that's why Easter is such a big deal. Because Jesus took his death, his punishment for our sake, his sacrifice, and he turned it from something sad and meaningful into something joyful and hopeful. That's what the resurrection does. You ever heard about leaving a story on a good note? Ending the story on a good note? Like, after the final battle and everyone's all wounded and damaged and hurt. And then the story ends and you close the book and you're like, wow, that was dark. But that's not how most stories end. Usually there's a wrap-up. This is what Jesus does. He wraps up all those loose ends. And so this is what it means for us. We get to have joy, we get to have hope because of what Jesus did 3 days later. Yeah? So it's a German tradition. It came over in the 1700s. It has nothing to do with Easter.
I know it was German.
It would have been better if like the disciples.
It literally just got attached because not everyone's a Christian, and the holiday was such a big deal. It was everywhere. They wanted something, and the Germans had something. So people adopted it. They liked it, and now we probably celebrate more than the Germans. Other countries have their own little traditions that are completely separate. And so, like, if you go to certain countries, no one ever sees Easter. I guess you see like Easter chicks. And like we even took some away. We're like, yeah, we'll do that too. Why not? So we have Easter every year. We just adopt everyone's culture. All right, guys, let's pray. We're done. Lord, we thank you so much for your word. We thank you for Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. And we thank you, most of all, Lord, for bringing him back to life. For showing us that death is not as scary as we think. That you've got something amazing planned for us after death. And so just help us, Lord, to draw our joy and to draw our peace and our hope from knowing that you've got great things in store for us. Help us, Lord, to focus on that, to focus on what you did for us today. To make that be what the day is truly about. With our heads bowed and our eyes closed, if there's anyone here today, you haven't taken a hold of that forgiveness that Jesus made possible on the cross, that atonement, as we saw in our opening video. But you want to do it right now? You want to say, Jesus, be in charge of my life. Jesus, forgive me of my sins. You can do that right now. Everyone's eyes are closed. Everyone's heads are bowed. And if you want to do this, it's private. You raise your hand. I'll see it and I'll pray with you. I'll just help you out with the words, but you can actually talk to him. And you can say, forgive me. Make me clean. Help me to follow you. Anyone this morning, if you want to do that right now, just put up your hand. Lord, I love these junior hires. I know you love them even more. Just bless them as they go. Help them to have an amazing day of celebration with their family. We ask all that in your name. Amen. I love you guys. Make sure you grab camp flyers. Tell your parents to go sign up at ccchico.com/JHSC. Junior high.
I want to win. Nancy might win. Dang it.
I won again. Good job. We found the sunrise position. Whose phone do I got? Got pineapple pop socket. Grab campfires, stack chairs, put away Bibles, do all the things. Thanks for being here, man. It's good to see you again. Good to see you too. I'm your family for me. I must see you downstairs. We'll see.
Yeah, we're here all week.
Oh, right on. Question?
Not a question, but I think it sounds great. Galatians 3:20. There is no longer Jews or Gentiles, slave or free man,
No preferences, no favorites, no one above the other.
Not properly yet. I'm waiting to be baptized before I'm like, yeah, this is what I like. Because I feel like I'm yeah, I know. That's the thing. It's just like I don't want to commit to something before